almost like a party really, like a big masquerade party, and everybody just goes there to have fun.
It's very difficult to just sum up. I mean, it's the whole family enjoying something that is just an absolute spectacle, and it's a spectacle for us as well.
Everyone gets quite excited. It's a lot of fun.
The atmosphere is great, everybody's happy, so it's really fun. It's something different. I've never been in one and I always wanted to.
It's just a feeling that it's very hard to express. It's a tremendous amount of joy.
Around the world, the spirit of Christmas is heralded in different ways. But in Adelaide, the capital of South Australia, the feeling of the coming festive season is heralded by a brilliant touch of magic. The appearance of a large, colourful procession through the city streets of fantasy characters, nursery rhyme floats and multicoloured fun-loving clowns, to the accompaniment of bright music by leading bands, fills the air with excitement. Hundreds of thousands of people turn out for the traditional John Martin's State Bank Christmas pageant, which is unique in the world.
Starting back in 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, when millions of families around the country were feeling the hardships, despair and hopelessness of these crippling times, a director of Adelaide's major department store, Sir Edward Hayward, decided to lift the spirits of its people and give South Australians a very special Christmas present in the form of a grand parade. To many families too poor to afford Christmas presents for their children, this parade was to prove indeed a blessing, for a trip to the city to witness this event was to be the only present many children could expect. The staging of this colourful pageant is unique. All those taking part to bring the storybook characters to life are not professional actors, as many visitors believe, but employees of the department store and the State Bank, happily giving their time in true Christmas spirit. Their efforts over the years have delighted and enthralled South Australian children, parents and grandparents alike.
What was to be a once-only pageant in 1933 has developed into a yearly event. The Christmas pageant symbolises everything South Australians are about: fun-loving, caring and spirited. John Martin's pageant set a precedent and proved to the world South Australians welcomed events on a grand scale. This in turn influenced Adelaide winning the prestigious Formula One Grand Prix, according to John Martin's managing director Jeff Coles. But unlike the multi-billion-dollar Grand Prix, Mr. Cole says you can't put a price on fantasy, and regardless of the state of the economy, the pageant is here to stay.
It started off to bring joy and happiness to the people of South Australia. Sir Edward Hayward conceived the idea and felt that he needed to bring to this city some smiles and happy faces. So he introduced a pageant which only had 12 floats, which went through the city of Adelaide. And it did. We had 100,000 people in Rundle Street, it was known in those days, on the very first pageant. Well, now it's grown to 72 floats and 1,300 people that are involved in it, and also the State Bank with John Martin's. But it is a tremendously important ingredient, not only to John Martin's, but to the state of South Australia. I've often described it as a gift to South Australia, because there is an expectancy. People often say, I know that in some stages of difficulty there might be some concern, will the pageant go on? The pageant will go on forever. It is an ingredient and it's part of the state, and it's very much a part of John Martin's culture.
When Sir Edward Hayward was ready to stage the first pageant in 1933, he wanted to make sure as many people as possible could experience the spectacle, which involved nursery rhyme storybook characters coming to life. Concerned about people not finding out about the pageant, Uncle Bill, as he was affectionately known to his staff, hired a Fox Moth aeroplane and Adelaide soundman Laurie Simon. The idea was that Laurie, while perched in the aircraft as it glided low over Adelaide suburbs, would beckon people to come to the pageant. Flying used to make him green and sick, but with microphone in one hand and brown paper bag in the other, he couldn't knock back this job as it had never been done before.
I can always recall one particular instance, a human one, where in one of the suburbs, and of course we did the whole suburb, all suburbs of Adelaide in that 1 hour of the charter of the plane. And I can see this lady now, I gave her a Cheerio. The lady with the dish, Cheerio, be John Martin's pageant, and she waved the dish. Now, you didn't have washing machines, dishwashers, you didn't wash at the sink, you washed in a bowl, most people did, and she was out throwing probably out the dishwater. That's the sort of thing, I can recall a little highlight sort of thing. And we were very fortunate with the weather. I can't recall having to cancel one even.
The first Christmas pageant spectacle included 10 floats, 6 bands and 150 characters. The pageant has now increased tenfold and up to 400,000 people come to see it. Sam Rose, John Martin's special events manager for 28 years, has travelled the world looking at parades and exchanged ideas with places like Disneyland and Macy's in New York. Yet no other pageant draws the same crowds per head of population as does the city of Adelaide's.
Well, I've looked at many pageants overseas and the way they prepare them. There's none just like this one. There's none that don't have commercialism in the parade. And I think that's one of the things that really bring ours forward is we don't advertise in the parade. It's strictly a gift. But I suppose the closest to ours would be Timothy's in Toronto in Canada. It's very similar to ours, put on by a retail store, Eaton's. I worked and I was with them for a while having a look at theirs. That's very interesting. It's not exactly like ours because it's in the very cold weather. It's just prior to Christmas over there. Of course it's winter time. That surprised me a little bit, how they cope with that cold, wet snow, etc. The Macy's New York parade, it's not a huge parade, but here again they get so many people from outside of the store to participate in the parade, to act as actors and actresses, which are professional actors and actresses, whereas they're all our own staff. They're all our own staff that are actors and actresses for a day. They may be a clerk or a shop assistant or the manager or the office boy or something right through the year, and then one day of the year or one morning of the year they are a star performer. And they are a performer too, and it amazes me every year the way they come good and the way they act their parts for that day. As I say, an office boy one day and Humpty Dumpty the next or whatever.
Preparation for our Christmas pageant is an ongoing affair. No sooner is one pageant ended than preparation for the new one begins. The first step involves developing ideas and sketches with artists for the new floats.
G'day, Chris. How's it going? Yeah, all right. Yeah. But, yeah, it's got to be a traditional pageant this year. And traditionally, I don't think that is the type of sleigh that we're looking for. Plenty of presents, mum, dad in the sleigh, Christmas presents, big Christmas trees, plenty of sparkle.
Each element of the float design is discussed in painstaking detail. Artists draw heavily on their many years of experience to achieve the end result. A range of designs are then presented to the Board of Management just 1 month after the completion of each pageant for the coming year. The selected designs are developed into scale models, allowing their true perspective to be assessed. An appropriate mobile frame to house the new float is then selected. Many of the floats have as their base 1950 model Humbers, strong, solid vintage cars where the chassis runs right through from front to back. This feature is necessary to support the huge floats and the contingent of character actors they transport.
Full-size templates are then made to scale and construction begins. This involves making the wooden frames to the model outline and filling it in with paper mache. The final form of the float is achieved by the application of spray foam, which gives it its character. Bob Gregory has been spraying foam on these floats for the past 20 years. Now, son Leon is following in his father's footsteps. A thin skin of polyurethane foam is applied all over the float to provide character and form a base for painting. Then, under the direction of the artist, specific areas are built up to obtain a finished shape. It's the same foam used for insulating, consisting of a mixture of two chemicals in liquid form. Both chemicals are preheated to about 60 degrees centigrade and forced through the heated hoses to the gun at a pressure of 1,000 pounds per square inch. The two different chemicals are mixed together at the spray gun head. The colour change you can see is the chemical reaction of the two materials mixing, boiling and cooling down. This entire process can be witnessed over a period of just 30 seconds.
High technology is gradually creeping into float design. Increasingly, they are becoming computerized to allow higher mobility and achieve a greater state of realism. The float at the rear of the pageant that all small children anxiously wait for is Father Christmas. This computerized electrical and mechanical work of art was designed and built entirely by John Martins, using the store's full resources. Mechanics designed the huge chassis to carry the float, with the store's electricians providing the control systems. Power for the automation is delivered by a 6-cylinder car engine. This, in turn, drives a large air compressor. Fine-tuning of the control valves are required to meter the supply of 27 cubic feet of compressed air to all moving parts of the animation. This starts the reindeer's nodding head and feet moving in synchronized gait. Even the sleigh moves up and down.
The skilled staff of artists and craftsmen pay attention to every detail to provide the maximum visual effect to delight the crowd. Even choosing exactly the right colours for the new floats is a painstaking task. The artist tries to create logic in their selection of colours that had commenced during the design stages and try to follow that logic through. For instance, logic applied to the sleigh ride float coming from a cold country required the use of high key or light colours. Lots of blue was used because blue is regarded as a cold colour. Logic again in the pale skin colour of Old King Cole. This intent was in keeping with his age and era of setting of scene. The colour of Old King Cole's coat was selected to reflect an air of royalty, as in the colour royal blue, and complemented his pink skin colour. No detail is left unattended, even to the decision of which way his head should be cocked.
Float construction is a time-consuming task. Building Pinocchio from the development of the model to final painting has taken about 5 months. To bring the floats alive, special music is recorded to accompany them through the city streets. This is accomplished through the resources of the Australian Army Band in conjunction with the Adelaide Division of the Australian Girls Choir. Formed 10 years ago, the group have toured overseas on a number of occasions and are acclaimed as the finest girls' choir in the country. This senior section, comprising girls aged between 12 and 17, come from a mixture of private and state schools and form part of a 400-strong chapter in this state.
Sam Rose says the fantasy and fun theme of the pageant hasn't been changed over the years, though new floats are introduced each year.
I remember when space was the big thing, we thought, well, you know, the kids around the place were getting all sorts of letters in, say, the spaceships and rockets and things like that. And we did sort of come into that era and had robots and spaceships and things, and we had a big group made up of this. It only lasted for a few years, and then we take a lot of notice of correspondence and phone calls, etc., from kids over the years, and the letters started to come in. You know, we're leaving out nursery rhymes. We didn't have the Christmas stocking in this year or something like that. We didn't have such and such and we find that we have to. They are only things like space and say around the world series we had at another stage. We find that they come in and then they go out. We've always got to come back to this same thing: Christmas, fantasy, nursery rhymes, storybook. And we all come back, and the generations after generations seem to like these no matter what we diversify into. But I feel at times we have to break the parade up into other sort of channels and avenues to, to stop just to make it different. We'll put it that way, just to make it different.
Careful planning ensures smooth running of the pageant. Sam Rose also has a great input into costume design. Together with wardrobe mistress Brenda Jones, who draws heavily on her experience in theatrical production, they visualise the appropriate costumes for each character and the props they need to complete for the best visual impact. Brenda makes 160 new costumes a year and fits more than 1,000. Some are quite a challenge.
Yes, the Stiltman's quite tall, and I had to make him a pair of trousers, and Mr. Rose wanted them to look very, very tall. And so we decided on a red and white stripe, so that was all right. We had that material in, so that was good. But then I had to go and get one of the boys to climb up the top of the Stiltman with his tape so I could get all the measurements of the legs, etc., to make the pair of trousers. And then I come back and work out the pattern and make the trousers. And hopefully they're right.
There's a lot more to Brenda's job, however, than just making costumes.
I write out a book each year that has every character that's in the pageant wrote down, and on that it says like what makeup area they have to go to, the name of the person that's been in that costume, what accessories they'll use, all that type of information is in my book, and it's also on cards that are on each costume, so the people know what character they are and where they have to go to, etc., etc. So all that's a big part of the pageant as well that people don't really think about. You know, they just think, oh, you make the costumes and then they're there on the day.
Like most other people involved in the pageant, it's more than just a job.
I enjoy doing it all. I enjoy meeting the people that we have to fit and creating the costumes. And I think the best thing about it is when it all comes together on the street and you see all the characters in costume and the floor all together, and you see the children's faces looking up and all the floats and that, and I think that's the best time. Just only lasts for a short period of time, and then of course you go back to the washing and ironing, but it's that's I think the biggest, you know, the best part of it.
In movie-making style, talent scouts are deployed from the selected members of the committee to go to each of the 5 John Martin stores and state banks and choose the right characters for the parts. Talent scout Anita Lang, a secretary, and Peter Golding, who works in travelwear sales, enjoy selecting the right people.
We're looking for Indian ladies, Indian men, and a few snake girls, a couple of snake girls from top of the float. And for the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, that's more character orientated. Alice in Wonderland, the March Hare, Mad Hatter, the King and Queen of Hearts, and a lot of card ladies to guard the float as it goes along.
It's not always easy, says Peter.
Especially if you have a set like I have, Frills and Pages, trying to find all the same height, the same size, and of course they do have rehearsals of having held march for the pageant, so we do have a dress rehearsal as well as a actual walking rehearsal as well. So it's a little bit hard sometimes to get them all exactly the same height, size, shape, but we do our best.
There are no distinctions between staff when it comes to selecting the right people. They're both good at their job, and searching for that special person has become second nature. Everyone, from the managing director to those on the shop floor, get involved.
I will never forget my very first pageant. I was asked to be in it, and I was a clown. And I decided that I would flex my muscles and run the streets of Adelaide calling out all wonderful news to the people. And I think I got about 2/3 of the way through it. I was absolutely exhausted, and I was almost brought home to the finish where Father Christmas arrives on North Terrace on the back of a float because I just run my legs off. But I think the sight that I will never forget, and that every year the same thing happens, is when one walks through the pageant and being involved and looks at the people, the young people as well as old, and most importantly the handicapped people on North Terrace. You just can't go past that area without getting a tear in your eye. It just brings a misty feeling to you. And you have this sensational feeling that you're doing something good. And I think it's just marvellous, just for an hour, to go through a situation where all you see is happy faces. It's just a wonderful feeling.
Margaret Tripodi, who works in the John Martin City Store, believes she was lucky to be chosen to be a Calypso girl.
Matter of luck, really. You just pop your name in, and if you're lucky, you get picked. And I've been lucky. I've been picked, you know, the years I've been here, and that's pretty much the way it happens.
Once the pageant characters are chosen, they have to try on their costumes.
Tight at the front.
Okay.
Tie it nice and tight, or not?
Yeah, so it doesn't fall off.
Yeah, here we go. It's fairly heavy with all the frill.
The thing is your shoes. Yeah, you just need something that will match in with it, you know, with a little bit of a heel. You look better walking with a bit of a heel on. Just depends on what you've got.
Bronwyn Fraser, who works in confectionery, enjoyed her part as an Indian in the pageant.
We had to dress up with a full makeup and long black hair and headdress and little dress, and run around making Indian noises and carrying a spear and making sure the children got involved in our float.
John Martin's director of buying, Andrew Love, was King Neptune for the day.
Oh, I think the highlight is the probably seeing the children outside the Hilton with the children who are either mentally or handicapped, retarded, spastic children, and just blind children, underprivileged children, just see their response, some of them who can't express it other than just movement of a head, and just seeing their eyes glitter or their face light up or their whatever action or motion, small motion they can do is absolutely the most exhilarating thing one could ever imagine.
Sales assistants love being transformed into fantasy characters. Jinky Cambronero looked very elegant in her beautiful dress for the honey float. From travel wear to swimwear, Themi Hatsi was totally transformed as a mermaid.
I thought I should play my part well, forget about being too embarrassed or too self-conscious. I had a part to play, I had a character to play, and I was going to do that, express that, and make everybody enjoy our float all in all as a total.
From the world of stationery, Stacey Pappas got a real buzz out of becoming a bumblebee.
There's something different. I'd never been in one, and I'd always wanted to. I mean, I'd seen the pageant when I was a small child, so I thought, oh, you know, I'd love to get in and see what goes on in the background too. So that's why I did it, just for some fun.
A clown's job is a vital part of the smooth running of the pageant. They are the buffers between each float, and they're to entertain the crowd, particularly during any momentary pauses that may happen during the pageant. There are 150 clowns in all, and it's never enough.
Would you all please come into this other room ready for your rehearsal?
They're the clowns, eh?
Yes, the clowns, and your do's and don'ts of being a clown.
The ones that haven't been clowns are probably not too sure, and there's a lot of do's and don'ts we want you to know about.
This group of selected pageant clowns are coached by Sam Rose on how to take their job seriously.
What we call a head clown. It's a bit like a circus, the pageant. You know, the clowns are there to cover up any mistakes or anything that goes wrong that won't go wrong anyway. It's going to be perfect. But if anything does happen to go wrong, the clowns are there, are the workforce to cover up any boo-boos that might happen to happen. If there's floats that spread out a little bit too far through mechanical error or some error, you're there to fill the gap. If something breaks down, you're there to push it on the side of the road. If somebody faints, you're there to pick them up and carry them away. You are there to help the pageant operate smoothly. You'll stick religiously to the groups you've been allocated to. There's usually a band leading the group and a band at the back of the group. That sort of defines the distance group.
Pageant day starts before sunrise. A team of mechanics are first to arrive. Their job is to make certain that the motors will start and are ready to pull allotted floats. They may look old, and some are, but they can be relied upon to make the journey without breaking down. Conducted with military-style precision, the plastic wrapping is removed and the floats are withdrawn from the workshop. Any mishaps at this stage would destroy 12 months of work on some of these colourful floats. Although they might look fragile, they are designed to withstand the weight of their human storybook characters who will bring them to life.
Charter 57.
One by one, each float is matched and coupled to their colour-coordinated tow motor. You can feel the excitement building.
At daybreak, they make their way through the suburbs from John Martin's goods store and workshop to the city some 8 kilometres away. Those lucky enough to live on the route taken are up at the crack of dawn to get a glimpse of the floats. Grandfather, Kingsley Smith, was fascinated by the pageant as a young lad living in Port Pirie. He hasn't missed a pageant since being in Adelaide, and each year sits outside his home on the route to the assembly point with his grandchildren, as he did with their mother before them. While the pageant floats are en route to the city, the characters that will adorn them are already gathered at a school's premises adjacent to the start of the pageant route. Here they have their makeup applied and dress up for the procession. For many, it's their first pageant, and their excitement is obvious.
Viv Kandel, A well-known Adelaide theatrical identity has been making up faces for more than 40 years.
Well, I think we've made up everything from fish and mermaids and that sort of type of thing, to Vikings and ancient Britons and American Red Indians and Negroes. You know, you know how many different floats there are in the pageant, so you can imagine most of those, apart from what we call straight makeup, which is just making your face up so that it stays looking nice for the whole pageant, and you don't show when you're getting red from heat or cold from being, you know, cold, or at least pale from being cold, or blushing or something like that. An ordinary straight makeup, most of the cosmetic people do those because they're done fairly straight these days. So it's all the different races that, you know, that the characters that they have in, and the clowns, of course. That's a section which is quite a specialised section of makeup, the clown makeup, because there are quite a few what we call traditional clown makeups. You probably know the ones that have the bits down, the lines down their eyes and that look sad, and the big mouth and the round cheek and the round nose. There are traditional clowns, and then, you know, some of the others they make up themselves. Also different, you know, the different colours are for clowns. You know, the most traditional clowns are white, red and black. I've been touched by some of the things that happen there. There was an old gentleman there who, I think he'd been in the pageant for 25, 30 years, and this was his last, you know, the last year, and he was practically in tears, you know, because it was the highlight of his year, I think, the pageant, and, you know, he was retiring, and I think he actually had retired, but they'd let him come back he'd retired sometime during the year, but they'd let him come back to do the pageant, you know. That was quite touching, I thought. But that's sort of part of the atmosphere there. What impresses me mostly about it is, one, the organisation behind it, because at one stage you look around that yard in the Pulteney school there, the quadrangle, and there's people everywhere, and there's tables which look as though they're full of mess, and there's, you know, jars of dirty looking water and all sorts of things, and bits of paper, and by the time everybody's on the floats, that yard's practically clean. It's absolutely amazing how all that junk and everything, you know, gets packed away, and I think it's marvellous how everything gets down there, and everybody's got every bit of their costume and all that sort of thing, you know. That's another thing that always impresses me, the terrific amount of organisation behind it. There never seems to be any panics. And there are some naughty people in the pageant at times who, if they're a witch and they don't, you know, they still want to look beautiful. So they rub out we put black on a tooth to black out the tooth, you know, so when they smile, and we put some creases and make the nose look hooked or something like that, and they don't want to look like that, so we make them up, and then they go outside and they rub it all off, you see. Or the boys go and have a few drinks or something, and they, you know, smear their makeup. So we usually go take a handful of sort of essential bits of makeup and walk up and down the floats outside when they're on them and touch them up. Because on a very hot day too, they need to perhaps be powdered down a bit more, you know, the perspiration's coming through. Or, as I say, from going and having a cup of coffee or something, they've smeared a bit. And they forget sometimes and, you know, scratch or rub, and they might have smeared there or, you know, messed their makeup a bit like that. Apart from the naughty ones. There's not too many naughty ones, but there are some. So we make them look ugly again, I should say. You know, that's acting. You've got to be the character.
Mention the pageant and it brings a warmth to conversations, whether among children or adults. South Australians have a very special place in their hearts for the pageant and the memories it evokes. That is especially so for the grandnieces of Sir Edward Hayward. Now adults themselves with their own children, both were chosen to ride as a fairy a giant white horse called Nimble, the envy of every young girl watching the pageant.
I think the earliest memory was probably the year I rode Nimble, and it was all very exciting. I think Mum had us practising waving and smiling to the crowds for weeks before, and then Dad took me down to Lockleys and showed me Nimble, and I sat up there and just got, you know, used to the whole thing. And then the morning of the pageant, it was very busy. Dad would leave early and go down to Lockleys and help get the floats all to where the starting point was, and then we all met and had our makeup put on, and then I was placed on the... No, it was raining. It was a very cold, rainy day, and before going on the float, just go and meet a few people and be introduced to a few of the, for example, the governor, and then Dad would put me on the float and had to wave the whole way around, and just very exciting. And then Dad was there to meet me at the end and take me off.
Oh, it was so exciting. I can still remember it clearly. Yeah, fabulous. Never forget it. It was so high up and you could see all your friends. Well, not, you know, you could just pick them out in the crowd waving frantically, and it was really exciting. Just seeing all the children and all the... I'll never forget, just that's where I saw so many wheelchairs and things for the first time, all lined up on the streets, and I'd never really seen such, you know, and just how much they all enjoyed it. It gave you a great sort of spirit to keep waving when your arm was dropping off.
84-year-old Ollie Copley was involved in the very first pageant and has only missed seeing one since, when she accompanied her husband on an interstate business trip. Ollie started work at John Martin's in 1922, at a time when all women wore gloves and they left work when they married. Ollie was a private secretary in those days, and next to her office was Nimble, a large white horse designed to carry the head fairy. Ollie would sneak out and climb up on him and pretend to have a ride when no one else was looking. Not a very ladylike thing to do in those days, she remarked, but the temptation was far too great. In her first and only pageant, Ollie remembers the glamour of being a French doll. Although she left to marry the following year, Ollie has continued a lifetime association with the pageant and watching her three sons who have played in bands in the parade at various times.
I was a French doll all done up in tulle and tizzy bows in your hair and everything, but we had to walk the whole... Well, I wasn't on a float, we were the marchers. We marched, and we used to go up on top of Johnny's on the roof to practice, and then we'd go down to Wayville at the showgrounds and do a practice down there, and then we'd come back. But the first day it was on was wonderful, really so exciting, because naturally Mr. Bill didn't know how everything was going, and he stood at South Terrace and he stood in front of us and blew a whistle and waved his flag, and he said, "Right, you're on your own." And away we went, and it was really fantastic. But in those days it didn't go down North Terrace, we went through Rundle Street, because Johnny's were not, well, they didn't go through to North Terrace in those days. So we went in through the Rundle Street, and when we got up the top of the escalator, His Lordship was up there waiting for us, terribly thrilled the way everything had gone off. Never had a hitch of any description. It was wonderful.
Like the Christmas pageant, Sir Edward and Lady Hayward's home at Carrick Hill was the creation of the imagination of a couple who decided to bring to their home city some of the magic they had been so captivated by when honeymooning in England. Already a man with a love for creating fantasy, he and his young bride, after their marriage in 1935, created a Tudor house set in almost 40 hectares of scenic bushland. The house, whose style echoes that of a 17th century manor house, is only just over 50 years old, built to showcase an extraordinary collection of Tudor oak furniture and interior fittings. The interior of the house is notable for preserving remnants of one of England's stateliest houses, Beaudesert in Staffordshire, which was demolished and the architectural features auctioned while the Haywards were in England. They attended the sale and bought the 16th and 17th century oak door frames, panelling and a particularly fine staircase, which now forms one of the most authentic English oak interiors in Australia.
Lady Hayward designed the formal English-style garden surrounding the house, protected and framed by a massive kilometre-long cypress hedge. Outside this boundary lies a thriving informal bushland. Carrick Hill, just 7 kilometres outside of Adelaide, was bequeathed to the people of South Australia in 1983 and officially opened to the public by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth during the state's Jubilee. Now maintained by the state government, conducted tours operate regularly, offering the visitor a closer insight into the man who was responsible for bringing so much joy to the people of this state as the founder of John Martin's Christmas pageant. The Haywards' love for England and its countryside drew them back many times. Sir Edward's keen eye for that interesting item that would come in handy for use in the pageant enabled him to return with Nellie, the mechanical elephant, as well as 2 London buses purchased especially to carry handicapped children in the pageant.
The pageant is supported by the State Transport Authority, who make the traffic arrangements, the St John Ambulance, the Adelaide City Council, who line the entire route with a blue honour line for crowd control, and the police, who roster their cadets on the day, their first official call of duty. Chief Inspector Trevor Oldman says it's a very peaceful time in Adelaide.
Cadets are rostered to attend at the pageant, along with other police officers from all over the metropolitan area. Their role is mainly in a public relations function, community policing, that is not in an actual policing of offences. I mean, the very nature of the event, it's very much a family-oriented day. It's not the sort of event where you find behavioural problems. And so the cadets and all of the police on duty are there really in a peacekeeping role, that is keeping people behind the blue honour line. I think that's probably a term that is synonymous with the pageant over the years. It's a blue line down the road to keep the crowd clear of the pageant route, and I think it's quite right to say that people just generally honour that. And so the cadets' role is to wander up and down that line, I guess, keeping people behind it.
Their first official engagement since commencing their training, the young cadets listen intently as they are given their briefing as to what they can expect from the enormous 400,000 strong crowd that will line the streets of Adelaide to watch this popular event. Not everything is too serious though, as some of the pageant characters found time to drop in and conduct an inspection of their own.
Along with the Father Christmas float, Nellie, the mechanical elephant, is a popular character with children and adults alike. Sir Edward Hayward paid £1,500 for Nellie in England in 1952. But since 1966, it's been a battle for Nellie to stay in the pageant because she kept breaking down. Fortunately, mechanically minded father and son, Albie and Ross Hill, came to the rescue.
They were missing for that many years, and we were just talking as we are now, and my son said, well, what become of John Martin's elephant? Well, I said, we'd better find out. So we went down to the pageant, where they keep all the pageant gear down there. We run into Sam Rose down there. He's the man that handled all the pageant gear. He said, it's over there. He said, they knocked the shed down which it was in, and it's out in the open. What made you say that? Well, I said, would it interest you if we got it going again? Of course, he said, bit of a big job. Anyway, we took it off and got it going again for them.
Working on their property in the picturesque Adelaide Hills, Nellie looked out of place amongst their beautiful Clydesdale horses and reminiscence of yesteryear. But nevertheless, Nellie, fitted with a new motor and drive system, obtained a new lease of life. Albie says in the early days, people used to think Nellie was driven by 4 men on roller skates.
Andrew Love says the pageant reflects community spirit and people love fantasy.
I suppose whatever character you do, you put everything into it, so it really doesn't matter. It's just being involved in the process, and I think probably it's very interesting the kids' reactions to various characters, and ones they recognise and ones they don't recognise, and you notice that a fair bit. But it's all, you know, you just become part of the whole. You're not an individual. Once you get out there, you're part of the whole set. You're not Andrew Love. You're just, I suppose, really an actor to a certain extent, but it's you're just part of the scenery.
Despite the 3,000-metre pageant route, which takes 33 minutes to pass any given point, with weather extremes of searing heat or pouring rain, all have given their utmost to bring joy to the people of Adelaide. Some showing signs of ice fatigue, aching limbs from constant waving, tired, blistered feet. Well, they finish another pageant in cheerful spirits. But what of next year? Yes, they would all be willing to do it again when John Martin's department store State Bank Christmas pageant transforms the streets of Adelaide on the first Saturday in November into a moving cavalcade of fairy tales as if by a touch of magic.